This video is the best argument for God. Simply put, this is an atheism theism channel. You think I'd be able to supply that answer? You think. And so I am going to give you the answer. There's a lot of pseudo philosophers out there like Sam Harris and Alex O'Connor who aren't getting paid by science, who I guess think they're doing philosophy, and they like to tell you these agnostic arguments or the value of some of the dumb arguments. They're okay. They're okay. No, none of them work. So I'm going to give you the best argument, and in fact the only argument. And so I'm going to have to give it to you simply. It's a common sense channel. I'm going to tell you the simple T-shirt, as David Chalmers says. The T-shirt example, then I'm going to try to flesh it out for you because it's a long video. The simple one is that there is some form of design. There's some kind of problem, a hard problem with design, a lot of it at the fundamental level, which means when science looks at things smaller than a molecule, things fall apart in the sense that in order to have the world we have, but have so much chaos at in these elementary scientific realms, shows some kind of stability imposed from the outside. That's an overly complex way of saying it, because that's not even my argument. If I was trying to make this, because I'm making this argument abstractly, I'm making it for someone else. If I was making it for myself, I would say coincidence. Too much coincidence in the world has to be a designer. What does that designer look like? And the answer is we have no idea, and none of the words we use and the arguments we make do it justice. That's the crux of the argument. But let's talk about this in a linear, systematic fashion, because that's all you scientist people care about. Science has imposed linear systematizing onto philosophy, which means even someone like Nietzsche from the 19th century would probably not go over well in 2026. There would be an audience, but in general, the language game imposes a linear structure on everything, not just science. So we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about this idea that there's too much design, and then we're going to talk about the conclusion, which is what ultimately is an argument from ignorance. It sounds bad, but it's my only option, bro. And if you deviate from this formula, you're not arguing for God. You're arguing for subjectivity or a religious history. You like the history and the mythology. You're not arguing for God. So 1A. So this is the idea that there has to be a creator. One, that our experience shows us an intentional world. I've explained this in millions of videos. I call it coincidence. No one else does. That's fine. If you do call it this breakdown at the fundamental level in terms of science, and yet we have a world that holds together, we do see intentionality just in that. If we're using pure reason, we're looking at the world, we come away with a form of design theory. Now, I hate design theory. I get it. Most design theories aren't worded correctly. This probably shouldn't be called design theory. It should be called creator theory. And that is that if you look at the world as a simulation, which is a great explanation for why this happens, why we can't understand things fundamentally. We have all these problems trying to put together the chaos, which means if we looked at it, the way we look at the world and the facts that we think we have in the cult of evidence, the result would be very different. It'd be a much more chaotic world. And yet it's not. An example is moral sense theory, which none of you people care about. And moral sense theory states there's a uniformity within innate ideas built into humans, which allow for things like the rule of law to even function. Now, yes, the world is falling apart, but what I'd like to say is it should have fallen apart thousands of years ago, to the extent that humans didn't make it. But they did. They made it fine. We got to this point. We're at a tipping point. I get it. So we experience an intentional world. And we can look at that in two ways. One, my idea that there are forces. I think Descartes even had this idea in a rudimentary sense. There's forces that work against you constantly, which demonstrate an intentionality. So we look at this also in terms of why physics has failed, that the particles are always trying to get away from you. So the collapse of the wave function, if you understand it, I'm not sure. It's very scientific, which brings up a whole other problem that physics isn't actually science, it's philosophy. Whole another video. But the fact that these particles are always escaping you is an analogy or a metaphor for the fact that desire is just like that. Human desire and particles and particle physics both try to escape definition. They try to escape being static, which means the desire always moves. Uh, Lacan's an example of trying to flesh this out in a more artistic way. But particles and particle physics do the same thing. The collapse of the wave function is basically um, we actually know nothing about where these particles are in time and space until they're observed. And when they're observed, they stop. And it's almost like an elusive construction and what would cause that kind of what appears to be intentionality. And so what you come away with is a more complex idea that there's a design theory, which means there's a creator, which is why it should be called creator theory, which means something's behind the curtain, bro. And this gets us to number two. Number two is the big move. So what's the best argument for God? The best argument for God is that we can't put anything into words that account for the unknown that we experience. There's your t-shirt right there. So the argument from ignorance, I get it. It's also a fallacy. It means if we don't know, therefore we know. In this particular case, it's something that has to be fleshed out and made separate from argument for ignorance in science. We don't know, therefore the world's flat. Um, Argument for ignorance here in a less fallacious way means that we have to account for this creator theory. We have to account for the unknown. We have to account for Chalmers' hard problem. If we care about anything in the realm of the unknown, which is what scientism doesn't want you to do, scientism wants to provide you a reward for your cooperation and your obedience. And that reward in the form of propaganda is um, confidence. It's a lack of doubt. That was another t-shirt, bro. I should get credit for this shit. That was a good one. So based on this idea that there is an unknown, which I've just talked about for probably 7 minutes now in this stupid video, given that there is an unknown, the problem is, and this is a stretch, this is why this our best argument for God is a stretch. It's we have design, we have no concept to explain it. Therefore, that unknown is God. So, and this is why it's complex. It is that we cannot form a concept. And you can see other examples in the world where things can't form concepts. And so, devoid of the concept, we have it's not really a vacuum, but it is a consistent Kantian noumenal. And if you think of the way Kant proposes the noumenal, which I promise you he was thinking the same exact thing, all I'm doing, in some sense, is modernizing Kant's noumenal. How much great is Kant? Look at me. No, Kant's a much better technical philosopher. He's much more organized and linear. But the idea is that given this noumenal that you can't approach scientifically and that you can't even really talk about directly, there is a transcendental way of looking at the world you do have access to and saying, given this, this must be true. Given the creator theory, there must be someone behind the curtain. We can't even conceptualize what behind the curtain means, what it looks like, what kind of material it is. That unknownness is the beginning of your conception of a God concept within, unfortunately, what would become a new religion. I'm not trying to put out a religion. And I know everything I say pro-religion, if you looked at it with real logic, is kind of opposed to religion. I get it. But this does provide you access to the unknown in a way that could be called um, useful religion. And it really is philosophy, but we're trying to get away from philosophy all around because everyone like Mike Tyson, whatever his name is, does put out this really conventional pop culture idea that philosophy is useless. I get it. So we're moving toward a better way of expressing how you approach the unknown and how you incorporate that into the known world. So that's your video. That's the best God explanation. Alex O'Connor, there you go. Send me a bill since you can't seem to come up with any useful concepts. He did a video just like this, like everyone does. But you can build a case that there is intentionality built into the world independent of us. That intentionality and that, whether you want to call it desire, whether you want to call it lack of chaos, that intentionality requires that we are concerned that our values move toward the unknown, and the unknown is something we can't conceptualize, not necessarily by definition, just by our intellectual limitations, but we can transcend that. They have this transcendental deduction about what that would look like, and that concept itself is the beginning of the God concept. Thanks for coming.